Lord of the Underworld, Queen of the Fairy World. Chapter 1, The Conspiracy of the Fairy World. In the distant fairy world, there is a unique female cultivator. Her name is Tumojin. The word blue shadow condensation is the supreme heroine of the fairy world, with supreme divine power and wisdom. Her face was as cold as a plum blossom in the snow, and her eyes were as sharp as a cold star. Tumojin is the leader of the immortal realm, and all the immortal clans worship her, and no one dares to disrespect her. However, such an invincible heroine was victimized by a traitor with bad intentions. This traitor's name is Emo. He was Tumojin's old acquaintance, and he has a love for her. It's a pity that Tumojin's heart is like water and he doesn't accept him. Emo hated the heroine in his heart, secretly conspired with him, and finally designed to put Tumojin in a situation from which he could never recover. A well-planned conspiracy caused Tumojin to be wrongfully accused of violating the rules of the immortal world, losing all his immortal power and becoming a prisoner of the underworld. Her sea of consciousness was broken, her consciousness could no longer function, and pain and despair were intertwined in her heart. Chapter 2, Survival in the Underworld. The Underworld, a place of boundless darkness, from which no one can escape. Tumojin was imprisoned in the deepest forbidden place in the underworld, and her cultivation was completely empty, only an unyielding heart trembling in the dark. However, fate seems to have played a joke on her. When she fell into despair, the desert god of the underworld was poisoned and terminally ill, and all the supernatural energy in the underworld also declined sharply with the illness of the underworld. As the supreme master of the underworld, the desert god and the underworld swept through the underworld, but at this time, he was helpless in the torture of illness, and the countless ghosts of the underworld began to be chaotic, and the order of the underworld gradually collapsed. The emperor of the underworld is looking for the only antidote that can cure this love poison, a pure female cultivator. Everyone in the underworld knows the legend of Tumojin. Her cold temperament and invincible divine power were once the apex of the fairy world, and everyone even believes that she is the only existence that can solve the poison of the desert god. Chapter 3, The Encounter of Rivals. Tumojin originally thought that she would be alone in the underworld all her life, with no hope of seeing the light again, but the summons of the emperor of the underworld made her inevitably embark on a path that was directly opposed to the desert god. Although the desert god is poisonous, he is still the master of the underworld, and his power has not disappeared, but Tumojin's current strength has been deprived of everything. Her heart was full of unwillingness, but she knew that if she didn't save the underworld would be reduced to death. When Tumojin came to the palace of the emperor of the underworld still looked at her coldly, his eyes were full of hostility, and even a little playful. He and Tumojin had inextricable grievances, and the two were enemies back then, and their relationship with each other can be described as mortal enemies. The immortal emperor never forgot Tumojin's former fierceness and the battle in which she ruthlessly defeated herself. Now, she turned out to be the only one who could save him. Tumojin, if you can really cure my love poison, I will set you free. The immortal emperor's voice was low and cold. Tumojin stared at him coldly, secretly thinking in his heart. She knew that if she didn't unravel the poison of the desert gods, she would fall into the abyss of the underworld forever. But if she chooses to detoxify, then she will have to face the deep hatred of the indifferent gods, and she may not be able to escape from it. What would you do if I detoxified? Tumojin's voice was calm and unwavering. Mo Shenming's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth lightly. I will set you free. This sentence carried a threat that could not be concealed, but Tumojin knew that this was also her only way to live. Chapter 4, The Experiment of Erotic Poison. Tumojin began to detoxify the desert god, but this was not a simple matter. The essence of the poison is combined by the oldest strange power of the underworld, and it is closely connected to the depths of the soul of the immortal emperor, and if not handled properly, it may even turn against her. In the process of detoxification, Tumojin went deep into the soul of the desert god again and again, confronting the chaotic emotions and dark memories. The poison of the indifferent gods was not ordinary love, but was infused with thousands of resentments and pains, which weighed on her heart like a mountain, almost unbearable for her. However, as time passed, Tumojin gradually felt the other side of the immortal emperor's love poison. This emotion was not simple love and hate, but deep loneliness and hopelessness. The unspeakable pain in his body seemed to be her inescapable fate. Chapter 5, The Fabric of Fate. In the end, Tumojin successfully unlocked the love poison of the desert gods, but this also brought greater variables. After the poison of the indifferent gods was resolved, the complex emotions in his heart were gradually released. The fates of the two begin to intertwine, and the former enemies may rediscover their relationship with each other in this underworld. Tumojin still couldn't fully trust Mo Shenming, but she understood that this complicated situation, no matter what the outcome, could not turn back. Her fate with the desert god has been closely linked, and the fate of the underworld, and even the fate of the fairy world, may be quietly changing at this moment. Chapter 6, The Awakening of the Demons. With Tumojin's success in unlocking the poison of the desert god, the order of the underworld was restored again. However, the desert god seemed to become more lonely and indifferent. Although he was extremely grateful to Temujin for saving him, the expression of this emotion made people feel a little weird. His unspoken feelings were like a sharp sword, faintly pointing at Temujin, and Temujin couldn't completely forget the past grievances between the two. After experiencing the torture of love poison, the immortal emperor gradually became more and more difficult to understand his inner emotions. The pain and illusions in those love poisons seemed to haunt him all the time, making him unable to extricate himself. The eyes of the indifferent gods were still indifferent, but there was a trace of longing that could not be concealed. Temujin, one day, the deep voice of the desert god sounded again, breaking the silence of the underworld. Temujin frowned, as if he had a premonition of the coming storm. She raised her eyes coldly and looked at him. Emperor Hades, what advice do you have? Mo Shenming's gaze penetrated Temujin, as if he saw something indescribable in her. He spoke slowly, I once vowed to pull you out and make you miserable for the rest of your life. But now, I find that all this hatred seems to be gone, replaced by an emotion that I never had. What spell did you cast on me? Temujin was slightly stunned, and then sneered, this is your own demon, and it has nothing to do with me. She knew that after the indifferent god's love poison was unraveled, the deeply buried emotions in the immortal emperor's heart had begun to awaken, and these emotions were like an out-of-control flood that would tear apart his fragile soul. Mo Shenming has always been the master of the underworld, and no one dares to challenge it, but at this moment, he actually has an emotional dependence on Temujin, and this contradictory emotion makes him even more at a loss. You don't believe me? Mo Shenming's gaze gradually became solemn, and his heart was filled with unprecedented struggles. He took a few steps closer to Temujin, and the sense of oppression made Temujin's heart tremble slightly. Mo Shenming seemed to know that the distance between him and Temujin was getting closer and closer, and the previous hostility between the two seemed to have become blurred at this moment. You know, I've tried to destroy you countless times and make you feel pain, and that's the deepest hatred in my heart. But now, I can't do that to you anymore. Desert's voice became low and hoarse, with a hint of unspeakable pain. Temujin stared at him, although his heart was extremely calm, but there was also a trace of wavering in his heart. She used to be the supreme of the fairy world, her heart was like water, and she never had real feelings for anyone. Now, her heart seems to be touched by the Emperor of Hades, but this is not love, but an extremely contradictory and dangerous emotion. She can't be caught up in this emotion, because she knows that once she gets caught in it, she won't be able to extricate herself. Emperor of the Underworld, Temujin's voice was as cold as frost, if you don't want me to leave again, remember that I have never had feelings for you. My heart is dead. Although these words are indifferent, they are the truest portrayal of her heart. She could no longer trust anyone, especially the Lord of the Underworld who had vowed to destroy her. After Mo Shen listened, a painful expression flashed on his face, but he didn't respond, just turned around and walked into the deep darkness and disappeared from Temujin's line of sight. Temujin took a deep breath, she knew that she had to be more cautious, the demon of the immortal emperor had awakened, and the situation in the future would be even more complicated. Chapter 7, Changes in the Underworld. As time passed, the situation in the underworld gradually became turbulent. The poison of the Hades Emperor has been resolved, but the order of the underworld has not been fully restored. The power of the immortal emperor began to reawaken, but at the same time, discontent in the underworld grew. Many high-ranking officials in the underworld began to question the rule of the underworld, and even secretly plotted a rebellion. Although Temujin was powerless to interfere in the internal affairs of the underworld, she couldn't ignore all these changes. The turmoil in the underworld meant that she couldn't stay here for long. She must find a way out, or she will also be in danger once the rule of the immortal emperor collapses. One day, Temujin was walking in the palace of the underworld, and suddenly felt a strong murderous aura. Startled, she quickly turned around to see a man dressed in black coming out of the shadows. The man was slender and grim, with a cold look in his eyes that matched the dark forces of the underworld. Temujin. The man's voice was as cold as frost. Temujin instantly became alert and stared down at the strange man. His aura was extremely powerful, and he was obviously not an ordinary underworlder. Who are you? Temujin asked. The man smiled slightly, with a hint of ridicule in his tone, I'm here to find you. The turmoil in the underworld is inseparable from you. Chapter 8, The Secret Temptation. The appearance of the man means that the deep secrets of the underworld are about to surface. His words made Temujin's mood even heavier. All this seems to indicate that a bigger conspiracy is about to unfold, and she and Mo Shenming can't get rid of each other's fate entanglement after all. Temujin's heart set off huge waves. What kind of power is hidden behind the underworld, and how will all this affect her future?